Well, hey, everybody. Happy Thursday evening. Alan Parr here, joined with my friend and brother in Christ, Frank.
I'm great, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great now. Hopefully, we'll be doing great after this is over.
No, man. This is going to be the end of our utensil for talking about this. Come on.
Cancel culture, man, at its finest. That's right. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. This is going to be an interesting. Yeah, Frank and I were joking earlier about we can already start to see the headlines.
Right.
Middle-aged white man Frank Turek, racist, and YouTube sensation Alan Parr, social justice warrior liberal or whatever.
It's coming, man. It's coming.
It's coming, man. But that's all right. All right. So super glad everybody is here tonight. Thank you for your time, and we want to respect your time. So we want to make sure that we are taking advantage of the moment that we have. And I want to start off with a word of prayer because we're all going to need it today. And then Frank and I will jump in and just talk about why we're doing this. And then we'll lay some ground rules for the discussion. So that way everything goes well. And then we're going to let you know what topics we're going to cover and tackle tonight, or at least attempt to. And we'll go from there. So, Frank, if you could do us a favor and just lead us in a word of prayer and ask God to bless our time tonight on this conversation.
Heavenly Father, this is a very emotional and important issue, and we pray that we would be graceful and reasoned, and we would bring your truth, not just our opinion, to this discussion. We know that it's so important for all of us that we're one, especially the body of Christ. And the body of Christ is one. We can bring the nation together. And so we pray we can do that. We thank you for all the people watching. We thank you for Alan and his ministry. And you pray you'd bless us as we go. No technical difficulties as we move on. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. All right. All right, guys. So first and foremost, let's just start with why we're here. Right. So, Frank, and what we're going to do, guys, today is just going to be we're going to try to keep it light. We're going to try to have fun, but we are going to deal with very serious topics. And we're going to kind of do it in interview style, where I'll ask Frank some questions. He'll ask me some questions. The majority of them will both answer together from maybe a slightly different perspective in terms of how we see things and our experiences and how we view things. But Frank, why are we here? Like, why in the world have you and I agreed to put ourselves out there and publicly discuss a sensitive topic like this? What are we here for? Why did you agree to be on this live stream with us today?
Well, because it's an important issue, race and ethnicity. And obviously, in the past couple of years, it's really come to the forefront. And obviously, it goes all the way back to the very beginning of our country. And this is something that we need to discuss. And as we'll get to at the end of this, Alan, I think we're both going to agree that the solution to all of this is the gospel. The solution to any issue that we have with one another is going to be the gospel. So we're going to emphasize that. Now, I know you've done some videos on it. I've done some videos and some podcasts and even some TV shows on this issue. So we thought, why not? Why shouldn't a white Christian and a black Christian come together and give our own perspectives and hopefully arrive at the truth by examining both where we've been and what we think and laying that against the word of God, and then hopefully coming out with a game plan at the end of this that we can try and heal the church and heal the nation.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I echo everything that Frank said, and I'll add on to that and say, guys, that one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is because I wanted to, as best as we can, to model for everybody how it's possible to have a healthy, respectful conversation between a white man and a black man, or white and black, or whatever, right? That it doesn't result in losing fellowship or breaking fellowship or friendship or disrespecting one another, even in situations where we might have disagreement tonight in the way we see things, but we still love and respect one another, because oftentimes this conversation gets so heated, so triggered, so emotional, as Frank said, that people can't even have healthy conversations because of the subject matter. So we really want to model for people how you can come together and have a healthy conversation. So with that being said, guys, let me just kind of share with you all the roadmap in terms of what we would like to cover tonight. All right. So this is hopefully gonna, before I do that, we got to lay some ground rules. We got to lay some ground rules, guys. Okay. Because this subject is very, very, it's very emotional. So we got to lay some ground rules, and let me just kind of lay those out here for you in just a second. So I'll read one, Frank will read one, or whatever. First of all, if you have a question, you can do it on my stream, but as I'm seeing here, you can actually do it on anybody's stream, because I'm seeing people from Frank's Facebook, from YouTube, from my YouTube. So disregard this one. Ask your questions in whatever stream you're at, and we'll eventually later on in this program, we'll put some of those questions on the screen and we will address those. Now, the next thing that I want to say, guys, is, and this is important. All right. We've got people moderating this, and rude and offensive comments and commenters will be removed. So if you start name calling, if you start being offensive and basically trolling and taking the focus off of the conversation and causing trouble in the comment section, right? Guys, we don't want to, but we want to keep this as respectful and clean and Christian and Christ-like as possible. So we would ask you in advance not to, or should I say, refrain from negative and offensive comments in the chat. All right. And if not, we're going to have to remove you not only from the chat, but maybe the channel as well. All right. So we would ask that. And Frank, if you want to read this one and kind of talk about this one, hope it's important for people to understand this.
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of every white person, and Alan can't speak on behalf of every black person. In fact, in reality, we're one in Christ, and our ethnicities are really very minor compared to our unity in Christ. So we're speaking as Christians first and as whites and blacks second.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said. And then another thing I would say, guys, is that the goal here between Frank and I, just in case you may have come to watch some sort of spirited debate, that's not really what we're here for. We're not here to see who wins, who loses. That's not.
Wait a minute, we are, Alan. We're here to debate. Come on.
Oh, okay. That's how you want to roll. Then let's. No, I'm joking. That's right. You know, it's interesting. Frank and I probably both enjoy a healthy debate, obviously. But, you know, the goal here is not for us to win or anything like that. It's just to have a good, healthy conversation, even if it does at times get a little spirited. And so that's okay. We want to model that for you. And once again, I already mentioned this, how to have a healthy conversation might be spirited in some way, but we want to make sure it's respectful. All right. So with all of that being said, guys, these are the topics that we want to try to cover tonight, if the Lord allows us to get through this. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. All right. So we want to start off. We want to talk about what is racism. We want to be clear about what it is that we mean when we talk about this idea of racism. And then I'm not sure if we're going to do it right after or maybe push it down a little bit later on in the stream. But at some point, we're going to talk about, is there such thing as systemic racism in our country? And if so, what do we really mean by that, right? So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to touch a little bit on this ever-sensitive topic, CRT, critical race theory. Also, this idea of intersectionality, which goes along with the CRT. What does it teach? Is it biblical? Is it godly? We're going to touch on that. That's not going to be our focus, but we will touch on it. And we're also going to look at, is police brutality really an epidemic in our society? Is it really a problem? Or is it just something that people are overreacting to, right? So we're going to dig into that a little bit later as well. And then we're going to talk about kind of what is the healthy balance between personal responsibility and environment as it relates to why people end up the way they do. Is it just one or the other, right? Is it just, the culture is holding me down, or, hey, you need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? Is this one or the other, or are there other factors involved? We'll touch a little bit on equity versus equality. Are those the same things, even though they sound the same, right? Which one should we be focusing on? And then we'll touch a little bit on a touchy one. It's a little kind of offensive to some, right? So the idea of, is there such a thing as white privilege? And white guilt, right? Are these real things? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But then later on, towards the end, we really want to focus on solutions. How can we better understand one another from whites and blacks? Okay, so if that sounds good to everybody, we will attempt to jump in here and and get started with the first one. All right, Frank. So I'm going to pass this off to you, and let's jump in. All right. What is racism? All right. How do you define it?
Well, technically, there's only one race, the human race, right? We're all one, but there are different ethnicities. Although it might be a little cumbersome to use that word in this context, but just to state up front, there's only one race, the human race. But if we're going to talk about racism, racism is a state of mind whereby discrimination is actually out in the real world. So if I have a racist state of mind or someone has a racist state of mind and they don't treat people differently, then it's just in their head. But if they treat people unfairly or differently because of their ethnicity, because of their race, then that would be racism, quite obviously. And that, I think, is the classic definition, that you are treating somebody unfairly or in a jaundiced way just because they have a different skin color than you. Now, when you really think about that, why would people do that? Well, maybe one of the reasons why people do it is because we do that on everything. It's not just race, right? I mean, different countries, different languages, different religions, different neighborhoods, different cars we drive, different neighborhoods in which, I mean, you could go on and on and on. We other people all the time. So it's really more about otherism than it is just about racism.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And guys,
how would you define it? How would you define it? What would?
Yeah, sure. So, I look at it from two different perspectives. One perspective, or one possible definition of racism I see would be viewing your race as being superior to another person's race. So when we have the mentality that my race is superior to someone else, in my mind, that would be an example or a good definition of racism. Now, another definition that people have put out there is when one race uses their power to oppress another race. Normally, it's a minority race. And when people define racism in that way, that's typically when you start hearing people say, well, black people can't be racist. Because if racism means that you have the power to oppress another people group, well, then largely in our country, black people don't really possess that power at large to oppress any other potential group. And so therefore, that's how people get to the conclusion. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's how people get to the conclusion that black people can't be racist. But if they just define it in the first way and say, well, racism is a state of mind where somebody views that their race is superior, then I think that racism can be expressed across the board. And let me just give you a quick example of this from my life very quickly. I'll keep it very simple. And because I think there's a teaching moment here with this. When I was in seminary, Frank, I was dating a young lady who happened to be white. And we had a great time, got along together. And over time, it didn't get too serious, but as it started to get a little bit more serious, the context or the question of marriage came up. And to my surprise, this young lady, who was a Christian girl, a seminary student, Christian parents, she said, I hate to tell you this, but I'll be honest, my parents would never let me marry you. And, I didn't have to ask her why, but she ended up telling me, is that they wouldn't let her marry someone who's black. And to me, that is an example of racism. It's the idea that, hey, my daughter is not going to marry one of them. She's not going to be married down. And I say that to say, if any of us are either directly or indirectly as parents communicating that type of mentality, whether you're black or white, and you're communicating that your race is superior to someone else's race, directly or indirectly, you are part of the problem of racism, and you're passing it down to your children as well.
Those parents right now are looking at you on YouTube going, we blew it. He could have been our son-in-law.
Maybe.
I mean, they're judging you based on your skin color, which when you think about how silly that is, I
Yeah.
mean, what, why would people do what we do? We do it in a lot of different ways. It's not
Yeah.
just race, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we're pretty clear, guys, on what racism is. Let's jump into another question. I'm going to come back, guys, to this idea of systemic racism a little bit later. I'm going to come back to that. But we're going to jump into another topic that's kind of a hot topic. And what is critical race theory and what does it teach? And so, Frank, I'm going to throw that out to you.
I'm
And
throwing it back at you, man. I'm trying to. I mean, I can start if you want. I can
okay,
start.
yeah,
I
you can go
read
ahead and
about it.
start it. I'll
Okay.
gladly jump in with
Right.
my views on it.
Right.
But I throw it out to you first. You can take as long or as short as you want to on it.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's be clear up front. There's no Bible of critical race theory.
Yeah.
There were people like Derek Bell, a professor who many look to as being the progenitor of critical race theory, but then there have been others since then, and it really depends on who you read, okay, as to what critical race theory is. Uh, there are different aspects of it, but from what I've seen, the it was really a way of trying to understand how racism got into our laws and our culture in a systematic way, and how even though we've changed many of the laws, there still could be a systematic bias against people of color in the United States. And is there a way we can get out of that? Okay. Now, as an analytical tool, yeah, let's look into that. And if there is systematic bias, let me be the first to say we need to get that out. Okay. However, one of the poison pills, it seems, of critical race theory, and I think this is what most people object to, is something embedded in critical race theory. And the books I've been reading say this is an integral part of it, is something called intersectionality. And I don't know if at this point we can show that slide
Yes. Let me go ahead and
that
put that
we
on
talked about
here.
earlier.
Yep. Let me go ahead and put that on here. And there you go.
Okay, this isn't just critical race theory, but this is a slide that illustrates critical theory itself, which includes critical race theory. And it does go back to Marx and Hegel, Hegel then Marx, and basically it puts everybody into categories. And there's an oppressed category and oppressor category. As you can see, people of color are oppressed, oppressors are white, oppressed are poor, middle class, owning, the oppressor group are the owning class, etc. You can see what's there. Okay, so the top one would be critical race theory, right? You might have sexism be one of these. You might have colonialism be, say, indigenous people and white settlers. So there's all different critical theory in here. But the poison pill, in my view, is that some critical race theorists will say that you are going to be heard more if you're oppressed. And if you're an oppressor, you're not going to be heard as much. And we are going to judge people based on what category they're in. And where intersectionality comes in is they will say, if you hold more of the qualifications on the left, in other words, if you're more oppressed than other people you're talking to, you have more of a right to be heard, and your opinion should be given more weight than people who are in the oppressor class. So if you're a black, poor woman who's a lesbian, a non-Christian, and disabled, and you're an immigrant, for example, you should be heard and listened to as opposed if you were a white, rich man who's a heterosexual Christian, etc. Okay? Now, this, for me, goes completely against the gospel. And I think it also goes completely against what Martin Luther King said when he said, I have a dream that one day we will judge my four little girls will be judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. If we are going to put people in these categories and treat them accordingly, that's racism or sexism or ableism or colonialism itself, right? That's the problem I see with critical race theory. And this is what many parents are objecting to. You hear people say, well, be less white or be less heterosexual or be less male. You're a toxic male. These are things that I think are wrong to do. And you don't correct racism or sexism or any of these other isms by being racist or by being sexist. But that is the biggest problem, I think, with critical race theory and intersectionality. Let me say one more thing about this.
Take your
Here's
time.
one of the odd things about it, or the perverse outcomes about this. If you're a white man who's a heterosexual and you're a Christian, but you're homeless, living on the streets of Dallas, where you are, Alan, you are considered an oppressor.
I'm not homeless.
But a black woman who's a lesbian and a non-Christian teaching at SMU is oppressed. You see how that really has a perverse outcome. So for me, this is the biggest problem with critical race theory. Now, there's a lot of truth in critical race theory. Let me say that. It is true that people oppress others. It is true that we ought to listen to people who have been oppressed. It is true that racism does exist. These things are all true. But this cure, in my view, is worse than the disease.
Yeah, yeah. And let me be the first to say that I agree wholeheartedly with what you said about it's not right, it's not Christ-like, and to put people in categories and label them as good or bad people based on whatever social categories or classes that they're in. They should be judged based on, who they are, decisions that they make, how they treat people. So we are in agreement as it relates to it being wrong to put people in certain categories. These people are good, these people are evil. Now, where I struggle a little bit is that, sometimes people will say, well, we don't need to teach critical race theory in our schools. They want to take it out of the schools and things like that. I would say this: if indeed there is a curriculum that someone can show me, like literally a curriculum in the school that shows me that this school is going to be teaching critical race theory in this way, I will be the first, as a black man, as a Christian, to say that is wrong. You need to remove that and rip that out of the schools. But if what's being taught in the schools is more of a history of our country, history of slavery, history of black codes, history of redlining, history of Jim Crow, history of mass incarceration, which we'll talk about in just a little while, if there's a group of people that are saying, hey, we don't want that in our schools, we want to take those topics out of the history book, because if they are in the history book, then it indicts us as a people group. It makes us look bad. It then puts us in a category that appears on the surface to be the oppressor. We are the bad people. Black people are the good people, the oppressed. Let's just rip all those pages out of the history book and wipe our hands and act like none of those things have happened in our country. If that's what's going on, then I don't think that is right, because even though we may not be proud of our history in our country as it relates to whites and blacks and some of the interactions that we've had, I think it's only fair that we teach people in our schools the history of what went on in our country, not from a blame perspective to say, hey, now if you're a white kid in this class, you should feel worse about being white because it was your people that did that. I don't believe in blame, but more from an informative perspective. I don't see anything wrong with teaching how we got where we are now, not you are the reason why we got there.
Exactly. I agree 100% with everything you said. In fact, let's just take a couple minutes and talk about history, if we could, because many people don't know what happened.
Goodness.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, when it comes to slavery, one of the things that I think is mischaracterized about it is the fact that many people think America started slavery when slavery has been ubiquitous from the beginning of time. In fact, Aristotle thought slavery was a good thing, and he thought the lower class people should have been slaves. Now, we don't agree with Aristotle on this, but I'm simply saying this goes back all the way to time immemorial. And it's not America that originated slavery. So let's get that out of the way. Let's also point out, by the way, that it hasn't just been one ethnic group that's been enslaved. Between 1500 and 1800, the Barbary pirates in the northern coast of Africa, most of them were obviously Muslims, took more than 1 million whites and made them slaves. They took them from the Mediterranean Sea, from the English Channel, from the Atlantic, and they made them slaves in northern Africa. In fact, there were hundreds of towers built around the Mediterranean Sea. There's about 100 in Sicily alone that were built to warn shippers, because the people in the towers would go, hey, the pirates are coming, you guys better get in, right? So any ethnic group could have a claim that they were mistreated in the past. The whites, the blacks, they could all have that claim. That's certainly the case. But in our country, it obviously was African Americans who were mistreated horribly. And after we went to war to end slavery, we got the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution to ensure that we would have equality. But it didn't happen. It happened for about 30 years later. Then these so-called Jim Crow laws would come in. And talk a little bit about, you were talking about this earlier. What was it, Alan? You were talking
convict leasing.
Yeah, convict leasing.
Yeah.
Tell people about that, just so people know, because that's important.
And guys, this is why history is so important, because it helps us understand how we got here, right? So, obviously we had this period of slavery that was supposed to be abolished in 1865 or so, somewhere around there, and so unfortunately, many of the white slave owners of that day, because you have to remember that much of the economy in the South and in the world, or in the country largely, was contingent upon slavery, and these slaves picking cotton and working on the plantations and things of that nature. And so when slavery was abolished and now all these slaves are free, as you can imagine, as a white slave owner, man, what's going to happen to our economy? What's going to happen? So what happened, and you can research this, I want to encourage everyone to research this, during the period of what's called Reconstruction, there's another period that was of something that was called convict leasing. And you can read about it and Google it. But essentially what was happening was, hey, a lot of the white slave owners would say, hey, we've got to figure out a way to maintain control and power. And so, but there's no laws to make these people slaves anymore. So what happened was they started coming up with laws that they could arrest people for the most minor infraction. I mean, you can read up on it. Super simple little things that you and I probably do every day in our society. And so they would arrest these men. They would be taken to prison. And then because they were owned by the state, they were then commanded against their will to go and work on the very plantations that they were supposed to be freed from. And so it's convict leasing. So you're now a convict, but you're now being leased out to work in the plantation. And so essentially it was another way to keep people of color in bondage, so that even though they're free by law, they're still not really free.
Yeah, and that went on tragically in our country. Something else that went on that many people don't know about is something called redlining. Redlining was a way to only lend money to certain people in certain areas to ensure that minorities couldn't get into those neighborhoods. And in fact, I've actually seen this in Charlotte. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, Alan. I once saw an old real estate contract about a home here in Charlotte that said this home can only be sold to the Caucasian race. I mean, I actually saw that with my own eyes. This had gone on maybe to the 50s or early 60s, this redlining practice that would prevent minorities from getting either house loans or buying houses in certain neighborhoods. All right. Now, something that happened to try and alleviate that was called the Community Reinvestment Act, started by Jimmy Carter in 1977. And just about every administration added to that act since then. And what they tried to do to reverse that, it was all well intended, but they tried to get more minorities loans, but they gave them loans that they couldn't afford to pay back. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that's what led to the 2008, 2009
recession.
crash.
That's it.
Okay. So there's a lot of well-intended policies out there that actually don't have a good effect. But what they were trying to do is they were trying to reverse redlining by doing that. And it didn't work out, obviously. So that happened. And, there's other things we can talk about when it comes to race, but we need to ensure that everybody knows our history, good and bad, because we can learn from history and we don't want to repeat our mistakes. Now, Al and I, you and I were talking on the phone earlier, and you said to me, you were talking about something whites did in the past, and he said, "I hope I'm not offending you." And I said, "Well, you can't offend me because I wasn't there." Okay, I'm not here to represent the white race or the white ethnic group. Yeah. I wasn't one of those people back then. But let me be really honest, because I hear people now saying that if they lived back in the time of slavery, they would have been against it. I honestly don't know where I would have been, because I wouldn't have known what my environment was. I wouldn't have known what I was taught. I wouldn't have known what my preacher said. Oh, here's another thing we need to talk about. There were preachers in the 50s. And one of them, by the way, was the preacher of First Baptist Dallas, Criswell, who in 1956 gave this firebrand sermon supporting segregation. Okay, so white pastors were preaching segregation in the 50s. Now, I don't know where I would have been in the 50s. Okay, I don't know if I would live back then. Maybe I would have been a racist too. I don't know. I hope I wouldn't be, but let's just be honest. A lot of times our culture will inculcate us with values that really are not the right values.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this idea of redlining. And so I just want to touch on that. I just want to touch on that for just a moment before we get into, well, you know what? I'm going to come back to that, actually.
All right.
I'm going to come back to that. Yeah. We'll come back to that because I want to.
It's too hot right now.
Yeah. But we're going to come back to the redlining conversation. Right. So let's tackle another question here. Okay. All right. Let's go here, I guess. All right. Oh boy. Is there such thing as white privilege?
Hey, we're out of time, man. See ya.
Is there such a thing as white privilege?
Well, it really certainly there was, in fact, instead of calling it white privilege, you might say that other individuals were disadvantaged, right? You could put it that way, however you want to look at it. But yeah, when there was redlining going on, when there was Jim Crow going on, when there was this convict leasing going on, and before that, when there was slavery going on, yeah, obviously there was white privilege. The question is there white privilege today? It depends on whether or not there is systematic racism. And it also depends on whether or not there is reverse racism going on. Because some have called, and even the Supreme Court basically called affirmative action reverse racism. Okay, so it probably really depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you go to corporate America today, I think corporate America would crawl over broken glass to try and hire a minority over a white person. I'm just being honest. And the same thing would be true of LGBTQ people. They will crawl over broken glass to show how diverse and woke they are, right? To try and make sure that here are our trophies, so to speak. We're going to hire these people and show just how enlightened we are, okay? So it might be reversed in some areas, but you have to analyze that on a case-by-case basis. It really depends on if there's if there's systematic racism, which is a question we'll get to. What do you think about that question?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you talked about that. And first of all, you touched on something as far as companies and diversity, right? And my perspective on diversity is there needs to be diversity in companies. And quite frankly, it's a shame that we have had to come up with things like affirmative action to even convince companies that it's important to have a diverse perspective, right? It's a shame that we've had, just logically thinking, We should have never had to come up with a rule that says, hey, your company needs to be more diverse. Think of it from this perspective. First of all, companies that are more diverse, just from a monetary economic perspective, have been proven to make more money and to appeal to more people simply because they have a more diverse perspective. Number two, why would you not want a diverse group of perspectives? Some women, some men, some blacks, some Asians, some Mexicans, people of Hispanic descent, because the more perspectives that you have in your church, in your culture, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your business, the better ultimately your company is, because you're going to have people say, you know what? That probably won't appeal to this group of people. Let's try to change this. Let's try to change that. But when it's so one-sided, you're getting a one-sided perspective. So that's the first thing I'd say about the diversity piece, is that it should be a natural thing for any company to want to have diversity in their company. Shouldn't have to be a rule. And, as we talk about affirmative action for just a moment, since we're going to just touch on that, a lot of people don't realize this. And if you Google it, I think you can find this. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but the people who benefited the most from affirmative action were actually white women. White women actually benefited the most from affirmative action more than any other group. So you still have this rule that was put in place that says, oh, we're going to hire all these blacks, but still members of the white race actually benefited more than anyone else. And so we could talk about that. But let's just go back to privilege here for a second. And the way I always define privilege is this way. All right. Let's say you have two fish. They're in the water and they're talking. They're friends. One fish gets taken out of the water, gets thrown on the side, or he gets thrown on the shore. He's out there. He's struggling for his life. He can't get back in. He feels like he's going to die. And so somebody graciously comes and sees this fish struggling for their life, throws the fish back into the water, and he goes to his friend and he's like, hey, man, it was so horrible out there. I almost lost my life. I am so glad to be back in this water. To which the other fish says, well, wait, what do you mean? What's water? What's water? The other fish had been in this water for so long, they didn't even know that they had an advantage of being in the water. They didn't know that what it was like on the outside. So when I say privilege, and I'm not even talking about white privilege, I'm just saying the word privilege in general. Let's throw the color out. The word privilege in general, in and of itself, is not something that any of us walk around thinking about or taking pride in and saying, oh, I have privilege, right? Like, for instance, if there's male privilege, I don't walk around most days and think, boy, I tell you, I sure am privileged because I'm male. Or if there's tall privilege, I don't go around thinking, oh, I'm privileged because I'm tall.
You got to duck more, yeah.
Yeah, nobody does that. And also, I'll throw this last one in there as well, which is the fact that if indeed there is something called privilege, call it white privilege, call it whatever you want, tall privilege, black privilege, whatever, call it whatever you want. If there is such a thing, I can say this, that it should not ever be something that anyone should ever feel guilty about. If you grew up and you were rich and you have rich privilege and you have all the advantages in the world, you shouldn't feel guilty for that's how you were born. That's the nature, that's the culture in which you came in, right?
Not only that, Alan, think about this. Everybody that is in our nation anyway has the privilege of being an American. And there's just about everybody in the world, virtually everybody in the world the vast majority of people in the world would trade places with you in a heartbeat. Let me just put it that way. Yeah. There are no caravans going to Venezuela. There are only caravans coming from Venezuela to here. Why? Because of this wonderful country that we have. It does give us an advantage over people living in Venezuela or people living in Afghanistan, right? So obviously we do have a certain privilege. We shouldn't feel guilty about that. We should feel blessed about it, right?
Yeah.
By the way, can I go back to the diversity question for just a second?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I agree that diversity is good for a company for certain issues, but not for others. For example, if a company is trying to, help people in the inner city, and there's a cultural difference in the inner city than the people who are running the company, they need people from the inner city in that company who have a diverse view to help them minister to those people, right? But there are other places I think that kind of diversity is irrelevant. Like, for example, United Airlines came out several months ago that said that half of their, by a certain year, half of their cockpit is going to basically be minorities, whether it's LGBT or Asian or black or whatever. Now, let me ask you this, Alan. When you get on a plane and you see the pilot, do you go, man, I certainly feel safer now because this guy likes other men? No,
Right.
you go, what does that have to do with it? Or I'm certainly glad this guy's an Asian. Or we got a woman flying the plane. Really, that's going to make things safer than otherwise. See, that kind of diversity is irrelevant for that kind of business. What does it matter? Actually, most of the time that diversity is relevant is diversity of talent, not diversity of skin color, not diversity of sexual preference, the kind of things that the companies emphasize. The kind of thing that brings a company together and makes them more effective is more often than not diversity of talent, not diversity of skin color or diversity of sexual preference. Although there may be exceptions, as you pointed out. I'm
Yeah.
simply saying that in corporate America, it seems to me the kind of diversity that is emphasized is not the kind of diversity that makes a difference.
Yeah, to that point, and I want to talk a little bit about. I'll also jump back to the idea of privilege in just a second. But to that point, one of the things that I do think is very important when it comes to diversity is representation. And what I mean by that is, for many people of minority groups, it is helpful to see someone else who looks like you in a position that you may want to aspire to have one day,
Right.
to give you the
Right.
belief. Now, I'm a different guy. I mean, I'm a different guy. I admit that because I was raised middle class, two parents who had college degrees. So I never saw myself as, oh, I can't be this because I don't see a black person in that role. I've never had that mentality to say,
Mhm.
before I can do this, I have to see a black person. That's just me. That's Alan. I just say if I want to do something, I'm going to do it. I don't care if I see no one there or anyone there. Like I played on my high school golf team. I was the only black. I didn't say I need to see another black or Tiger Woods or whatever. He wasn't even around at that
Uh-huh.
time, right? So that's me. But for many people, it's helpful for them to say, you know what? Wow, I guess I could be an air pilot because my uncle
Sure.
or other people in the company. So from that perspective, I think diversity can be
Yeah, I
helpful.
agree. Yeah, not we had a president of the United States, half black, half white, right? So maybe that inspires people. That's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to touch a little bit once again on this idea of privilege for just a second, because I want to talk
Mhm.
about something that I think it kind of goes along with it. And it's something that I don't think a lot of people really know about. And let me ask you, are you familiar with the idea of double consciousness?
Double consciousness. I'm hardly conscious myself singly, so no, I'm not, not
Okay.
aware of that. Go ahead, Alan.
Okay.
Sometimes I commit it out of my own consciousness. But what is it?
Okay. And I'm glad you asked. So double consciousness is the idea that a lot of black people feel as though they have to find a way to coexist in two very different, distinct worlds. And hence the idea of double consciousness. So I have to be black enough to be black, but I have to be white enough to be white. And if I'm not balancing these two worlds well, then I'm going to fall out of one of these two worlds. And so, give you an example. If I There is a fear oftentimes within African Americans in corporate America that we really can't be our full total selves, because if we are going to be perceived or seen as somebody who's maybe unfit for a particular
Role in the
promotion
company?
or something of
Okay,
that
yeah.
nature.
Mhm,
For
mhm.
instance, a black woman may feel like I can't come into work with dreadlocks or with cornrows or an afro, because people may assume, even though that's how my hair naturally grows, or it's kinky or it's curly, whatever, people may assume that I'm ghetto. People may assume that I am a certain way. And so I'll just go get a weave and make my hair straight. That way I can fit in. And so it's this conscious idea that, hey, in order for me to get ahead or to fit
Mm,
in, I
mm.
have to assimilate to be more white. right? And that it's just it's a feeling that a lot of black people have that we don't ever really talk about. Perfect example would be if I go to work and I say, "Yo, what's up, bro? What's up, player? How you doing, bro? I feel you, man. What's going on, bro?" Like if I go to work talking like that, which is where I may talk in my at the backyard barbecue at my Uncle Jesse's house, right? I may talk like that over there, but I could never talk like that at work because that is perceived as ghetto, as uneducated, and we know the moment we say that, we very well we may be characterized as not being fit to speak for this country. We're never going to let that guy ever speak again because of what we just heard. So we have to clean it up. Hello, sir. How are you? This is wonderful. Oh, good to see you today. Thank you so much, sir. Right? We may not always talk that way, but we know we have to fit in to the culture, or we and I'm just asking you this question, and I don't know the answer to this, but is that something that a lot of white people feel? Do they feel like they have to somewhat change who they may naturally be, or how they wear their hair, or how they whatever, in order to be accepted and fit in most areas of life?
In corporate America, well, you might have people, and look, I'm from New Jersey, so I was, the city I grew up near was New York, so I'm a New Yorker, but and that's a melting pot there, right? But if you brought some country bumpkin, so to speak, from the deep South into New York, who had a Southern drawl and spoke that way, I would think that person might get a little conscious too, or have a double consciousness. If I'm going to fit in up here in New York, in this cosmopolitan city, I'm going to probably have to clean up the Southern drawl thing, right? I don't know if that's as relevant as the situation that you've brought out. Basically, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that this is what motivated, and I don't have all the specifics in my head, but in the African American Museum on the Mall, they had a display that said, these are white values, and it included responsibility and hard work. Do you remember that?
And I don't remember
there was such an outcry over that they eventually took the display down. Mm-hmm. And even a Coca-Cola recently said, be less white. What is that supposed to mean? Is it supposed to mean that if they're going to define responsibility and hard work as a white value, are we supposed to be less responsible and work less hard? What does it mean? I don't know.
And it's interesting that you say that, right? It's so interesting that you say that, because unfortunately, and I know we're getting way off topic, guys, but I know we got a whole bunch of other questions. We're going to get to them in a second, but stuff is important. Unfortunately, for many blacks, we have been taught that white is right? So what I mean by that is, for instance, I got teased all growing up, and people told me that I acted white and I talked white.
Okay, so but what does that mean?
Oh, what does that mean? It means that if you're a black person and you use proper English, you are talking white. You're not talking properly. You're not using proper. You are talking white. And so the idea
is that a good thing to tell kids that?
That's horrible. It's horrible to tell kids that.
So, but why is it? Maybe it's because whites have been in the majority here, and whites therefore kind of set the culture. This is how we expect you to behave. And so, yeah, I could see being a minority, whether I'm a black minority or whether I'm an Asian minority or whether I'm even a white minority from the South trying to go to, say, New York City, I'm probably going to have two conscience, easy for me to say, whatever you say.
Yes, I got
I'm probably going to have these two worlds in my head, that when I go home, I'm going to be my country bumpkin self. But when I go to the office there on Wall Street, I'm going to have to dress up and talk differently.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's dig into another one that can be pretty controversial, and let's talk a little bit about this. Police brutality. Is this really a problem? Is this really an epidemic? Or is this just something that people are blowing way out of proportion in the minority community? What are your thoughts?
Well, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. Okay. I think one of the first of all, what we saw with George Floyd was obviously horrific. The guy got what he deserved. We still don't know to this day, however, whether it was racially motivated. In fact, Keith Ellison, who was the attorney general up there in Minnesota,
Frank, I want to
who's
be careful.
African.
I want to be careful.
Yeah,
I want to protect you for a second. When you say
yeah.
he got what he deserved, make sure
Oh,
clarify.
I'm talking about the cop.
Okay, no,
Yeah,
I just want to protect you because
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I just want to. I want as your
Thanks,
friend. I
man.
want to protect you on there because
Chauvin,
some people
thanks,
might be
man.
like, "Oh, he's saying George Floyd got what he deserved." He said,
No, no, no,
"I
no.
know."
Yeah, yeah,
I
thanks.
just I just wanted to make sure. Okay, go
No,
ahead.
no,
Go ahead.
no.
I figured
Yeah,
I'd do
good.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Chauvin got what he deserved. That the
Okay.
cop, you don't kneel on a guy's neck for 9 minutes. I mean, what's the point of that? Anyway, Keith Ellison, who is the attorney general there at up there in Minnesota, was asked, you know what, why haven't you charged him with a hate crime? And he said, well, we don't think it was racially motivated. From what I've read, they both knew one another. They were both bouncers at the same club, Chauvin and Floyd. It was more of a personal vendetta. Okay. But leaving all that aside, here's what tends to happen, I think, when we see these horrific situations on TV played over and over again. We tend to think this is happening everywhere. But when you look at the data shows this, depending upon which stats you look at. In 2019, there were 9 unarmed black men killed by police in the entire country. And there were 19 unarmed white people killed by police in the entire country. Some say that number may be as high as 25, but it's a low number, relatively speaking. But when you survey people on this question, many people think that there's been 1,000 people killed by white cops in the country. So far, as of August 25th in 2021, the best data we have, there have been 4 black men killed by cops, and those black men were unarmed. And the question, it's always a question, is what unarmed means. In every case, these people were resisting arrest in some way. Unarmed might be that they didn't have a gun or they had a knife, but they may have had a brick, or they were resisting arrest. They'd been tased and they continued to resist. Or some, it's murky, it's muddy as to what unarmed means, is all I'm saying. So there's not an epidemic of this according to the data. Now, I will say emotionally that annoys people, because emotionally people want to see when George Floyd gets obviously treated very poorly and is killed, people go, this is happening everywhere and it needs to stop. And if it is happening everywhere, it does need to stop. But the truth is, it's not happening everywhere. In fact, really what's going on, as of right now, the best data we had from a few days ago, there have been 220 police officers shot in America in 2021. 67 of them were ambushed. And that number is 140% higher than it was in 2020. So the idea that the police are evil is actually a condition that is influencing people to ambush police and to shoot at police, it seems. So there is, according to the data, there's not an epidemic, but it appears to be going the other way, that the police are actually getting the brunt of the violent behavior. Mm-hmm. I don't know what data you've seen. By the way, we're going to post the data, and some of that data I just gave you is from the Washington Post. So this is the 9 and 19 number. That's from the Washington Post. Yeah. This is not some right-wing conspiracy group or anything. This is just the data they gather from police reports. Anyway, what's your thought on it?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a whole lot to say on this one. I'm going to try to keep it somewhat brief, but I don't know if I'll be able to keep it super brief because I have a lot to say on this one. Let me first start off by saying that I am not for defunding the police. I want the police. If something goes on in my neighborhood, I want to be able to call the police and I want to be able to say, hey, can you come and take care of this crime? So let me be clear on the fact that I am in no way, shape, or form against the police. I don't think that we should defund the police. Let me also go on record and say that just like in any other profession, teachers, lawyers, physicians, there were always going to be, the majority of them are going to be good, and you're going to always have a certain number of people in any profession that are going to be bad. And so let me just be clear that I do not believe that the majority of police officers are evil and racist. I don't believe that. I do not believe that. I rebuke that. I don't believe that at all. And let me just finally say, before I go into how I feel, that outside of some things that happened to me in high school, which I won't go into right now, I, for the most part, have had positive experiences with police officers after my incident when I got stuffed into a police car for fitting the description of a young black male who just raped a girl and committed a crime, theft right by a golf course that I was playing after golf practice. And so outside of that incident, I've had positive experiences. And I can't speak for many of my other friends who have shared their stories. So I want to preface what I'm going to say with that. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because sometimes statistics don't tell the full story. And it's easy for us to throw out statistics and say, well, look at the data, because the statistics don't always tell the full story. Because the question we have to ask is, okay, well, first of all, let me go here, that 9 black men versus, let's say, 19 white men per capita, there's already a problem there, right? Because there are naturally more interactions with police officers and whites than there are with blacks. So already there's a problem already, but that's a minor thing that we'll just throw that away. But the bigger thing is we have to ask the question, how are these killings happening, right? So perfect example. I think everybody here is probably familiar with the story of, Tamir Rice, who's a 12-year-old boy who's in the park playing with a little, just a pellet gun or just a play gun,
toy gun,
like any little kid would. He's there with his sister in the park. I guess she leaves him play around. Somebody calls and says, "Hey, there's a man. I think they thought he was a man. There's a man here who has a gun," and they felt threatened for their life, which is typically what people say. When they see somebody, they feel threatened for their life. And so therefore, it's horrific when you think about how it was handled. The police pull up, and you can look at the video, you can go to YouTube, you can watch the video. Within 2 seconds of pulling up in front of this little 12-year-old boy, within 2 seconds, they shot him dead. Now, people say, well, they sold him to put his gun down, but you can watch the video. Police report within 2 seconds. And so and then to compound things, his sister, who sees now that he's got shot, she runs over to try to take care of him. The police tackle her to the ground, right? And so, yes, that's just, you could point out and say, oh, that's a statistic, that's just one person. But the question is, why was it handled in that way? Right? Why are the police not trained to maybe manage the situation where they pull up, they say, hey, put the weapon down from a distance, put the weapon down, maybe hide behind your car, take cover. I think that's how they're supposed to be trained. I don't know how it is that you roll up to somebody and within 2 seconds, you shoot that person dead and happen to be a 12-year-old little kid. So it's these types of things that make people say, well, hey, if these same atrocities were happening in the white communities, and let me be first to say, I don't want them to, right? None of us want to see it happen to white, black, Asian, whoever. But if they were happening in that same way in the white communities, we have body cam footage. We have cameras everywhere. And God forbid, we now live in a time where we have cell phones everywhere. People are taking cell phones. The question is, why is it that we don't see more videos of interaction with white unarmed people with these same white police officers who are getting treated the same way. The George Floyds, the Philando Castiles, the Eric Garners who said, "I can't breathe," right? And yes, okay, I give it to you. Some of these people may have done some things to put themselves in the position to where the police officer had to restrain them. I get that. I get that. But the question is, did they have to go so far as to kill the person when the situation seemed to be restrained? So that, I know you probably want to respond to that, but that's one of the things that we have to look at and say, okay, why don't we see these same things happening in the white communities if indeed it's not a real problem?
Well, yeah, I agree that is something that needs to be looked at. Let me say this, and I don't know all the details of the situation that you just mentioned there, but quite obviously, cops do make mistakes, and sometimes they do evil things, as you said, Alan. There is a situation very similar to the George Floyd situation where a white guy couldn't breathe. In fact, my friend Mike Adams wrote a column on it. It turned out to be the last column he ever wrote. Committed suicide about a month after that. The column was called "White Man Can't Breathe," and you can go to townhall.com and find it. And it was almost the same situation with George Floyd, but nobody, or virtually no one in the media, covered it. And there's one of the things that, I don't want to get into Mike's death here, but one of the things that led to his emotional state taking a nosedive was he took so much heat for that column because it doesn't fit the media narrative. The media narrative, as you know, is that the cops are bad and this brutality needs to stop. And where they're right, obviously it does, don't get me wrong, but the data does not bear it out. They're not going to cover that. I can't remember the man's name, but they're not going to show you any video looped on the nightly news over and over again when it happens to a white guy in, I think he was in Louisiana. You're just not going to see it. It doesn't fit the media narrative. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but you're not going to see it. And this is why I think we get the media effect. Now, sometimes the media effect works for good. And you and I have spoken, and I don't know how much our audience is familiar with Emmett Till, but Emmett Till was a young black boy that was sent down to the South back in the 1950s. I think it was about 1956. And he said something to a woman in a grocery store who was behind the counter. He allegedly flirted with her. The accounts vary what happened. And he was murdered because of that. And the sheriff put his body into a coffin and shipped it up to his mom up in Chicago. And when his mom opened the coffin, she said, "We're going to have an open casket funeral," because they so brutalized that 14 or 15-year-old young man that she said, "I want the world to see how evil racism is." And that event in 1956 galvanized people. One event, not statistics, but one event galvanized people to say, this needs to end. And 8 years later, the civil rights legislation was passed in Congress in 1964, and it probably wouldn't have happened if people didn't see Emmett Till brutalized in that coffin. So I understand why this is emotional. When you see a black man brutalized by the cops, you go, this needs to end. This needs to stop. You're not going to see it in the media when it happens to a white guy. They're not going to cover it. Okay? It doesn't fit the narrative.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because you made it was such a great point about how we could look at Emmett Till and say, well, you know what? Hey, we're doing well because it happened, to one person.
Just to one guy. Yeah,
exactly.
Right, yeah.
That one person, the way in which it happened, all that. But let me just touch on the media for a second, because, you mentioned the media, and I understand where you're coming from with that. But in the day and age in which we live, this is the most interesting thing, is that because so many things that are happening nowadays, people are catching on their phones, it doesn't have to be shared or picked up by a major network or a news network or anything like that, because we're not dependent on just media. We have now what's called social media, where people can post a video on YouTube, people can post a video on Facebook or Instagram, and that's how these videos start to go viral, right? People start sharing it. Oh, did you see this? Or did you see that? Did you see how the police did this? And so even though, some of the things that are happening in our world may or may not be picked up by the news media because it may not fit the narrative or whatnot, we have to remember that, the news media is not the only way in which stories get out. Nowadays,
Yeah,
things get
that's
out via
true.
social media.
That's true, but still, the nightly news and the major news outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're the gatekeepers of what smaller papers cover and what even some television networks cover. So yeah, you can get out on social media, but then again, you got big tech out there censoring certain views, as you know. That's why you've got these alternatives like Rumble and other places, which get a fraction of what YouTube gets. I mean, we're grateful for YouTube. We're on it right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if we were to suddenly talk about a controversial issue, we might get shut down right now. A controversial issue that YouTube didn't agree with, right? If we
Yeah,
started talking about, COVID or what they consider to be misinformation, we'd be shut down. So
yeah,
I get your point. I still think that, and it's been said this way before, Alan, that exceptions make bad law. Exceptions make bad law.
mm-hmm.
You need to create law based on the data rather than exceptions. And maybe you're right. Maybe it happens more often in the black community than it does the white. Maybe it does. Let's say for the sake of argument it does. The question is, what do we do about it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. And I want to add one last thing to this discussion before we move on to the next question, which I think we can tackle systemic racism next,
All right.
and that's one I want to talk about. But I want to just bring this last point here, which is the idea that when we talk about this idea of police brutality, we have to remember that it extends far beyond just shootings. Right? I'd like to extend the conversation to say it really involves negative interactions, if you will, with police officers that may or may not result in any sort of violence or shootings in any way, shape, or form. So, for instance, and I don't know where the statistic is, I'll have to find it, but I remember reading somewhere where blacks are 3 times more likely to get pulled over by the police during the day, but then at night, the numbers are pretty even. Right. So during the day, when you can see whether this person is white or black, statistics, and once again, if we're going to talk about data and statistics to keep everything on the up and up, why is it that blacks are 3 times more likely to get pulled over for, I don't know, not violent, but minor infractions of the law?
Traffic infractions or something. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't stop too far. You didn't stop long enough at a stop sign. You didn't put your signal on, things like that. And then at night, well, hey, this person is speeding. Let me pull them up. And so it's things like that. It's also things that, like, when you talk to it's sad, but when you talk to the majority of black men, particularly, it's sad that most of them have had some sort of negative interaction, getting pulled over and being asked, well, whose car is this? What do you mean whose car is this? My car. Why would you ask me that question? Or, is this your car? Or
why are you in this neighborhood?
Why are you in this neighborhood? What are you doing here? And
Yeah.
things of that nature. And like I said, I am a firm believer, because I know people are going to they're going to write me off and they're going to say I'm some sort of liberal social justice guy. That's fine if you want to say that. But let me just reiterate. I do not believe that the majority of police officers are evil. I think the majority of them are wonderful, kind individuals who want to serve and protect. I really do.
Yeah.
I believe that with my heart. But I think there's something to be said when there seems to be a disparity, according to the statistics, in terms of the interactions, whether shooting or not, between blacks and police officers.
Right. No, I've heard that, and that's probably true. That I think blacks are probably pulled over more. The question is why, and what can we do about it? Is it racism, or is it the fact that there are more cops patrolling black neighborhoods, or is it, and according to a recent Gallup survey, 81% of Black Americans want more cops in their neighborhood, not less, despite the fact that you have the defund the police movement.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if you do defund the police, which in my view, Alan, was the dumbest political idea of 2020.
Yeah,
Um,
not for that at all.
if you do defund the police, the minority neighborhoods are going to suffer the most.
Yeah,
So,
I
and people who live in those neighborhoods know that.
yeah, yeah. And like I said before, I am not in any way, shape, or form a proponent of defund the police. So whatever you guys say after this, which may be my last time on YouTube ever, right?
That's right.
Or I may lose half my follow. I don't know. Who know? Who knows? But whatever you guys
And
say, we would.
by the way, it could be profiling, as someone just put. It could be that cops are profiling blacks more. It could be that could be the case,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
possible. You
yeah.
know.
Absolutely. Well, Frank, let's dive into this discussion. I think this is probably the hottest topic that we're going to talk about tonight because I personally have a lot of things I'd like to share on this particular one, but I would love to hear your thoughts. I know you and I have talked a little bit offline on this. Is there such a thing as systemic racism? Is that just something that Black people kind of just imagine up and use as an excuse? The white man's trying to hold us down, or is that really something? Is there really something to that?
Well, in my view, well, I don't think it's just my view. Obviously, that was the case prior to 1964. I mean, legally, we've been through it all, right? We started with slavery, we go to Jim Crow, we go to redlining and other things. It wasn't until 1964 that we got rid of at least laws that had racist, easy for me to say, that were racist in themselves. Okay. Now, I think personally that there are certain laws on the books now that have disadvantages for minorities, although most of them were not intended to disadvantage minorities. So let me just give you four real quick. One is abortion, and actually that may have intended to disadvantage minorities due to Margaret Sanger. You know, she put most of her Planned Parenthood clinics near minority neighborhoods. And while blacks make up 13% of the population, they account for 38% of the abortions. So, in fact, the last I heard, the abortion rate outpaced the birth rate among blacks in New York. So there were more babies aborted than there were born in New York City. Now that needs to change. We need to protect unborn life, and that'll protect a lot of black babies and other babies as well. The second thing I think that needs to be done is school choice. I mean, if we're going to have public education where people are going to have an equal opportunity at a good education, why should some white affluent kid who lives in a neighborhood with a good school have the ability to go to that good school, but some poor minority kid in another neighborhood doesn't have that same right? With school choice, both those students could go to the same school and get the same sort of education. So school choice would make everything better. And the only reason it's not in place now is because the teachers' unions don't want any competition, and yet competition makes things better. The third thing I think that needs to be done that has a negative effect on minorities and even whites is welfare. Welfare to work was something Bill Clinton put in, and he was right, because you don't want people to get dependent on the government, and you don't want to pay people to have children out of wedlock. But that's exactly what has happened with the whole welfare system. And I don't, you know, Thomas Sowell, the brilliant economist who's now 91 years old, taught at Stanford, Cornell, University of Chicago, African American, grew up in Harlem. He points out that what has really helped to destroy minority families has been the welfare system. Because in 1960, 2/3 of black kids grew up with both parents. Now it's inverted. Only 1/3 grow up. And the same thing has happened in the white community as well. It's just not as drastic. 40% of white kids now are born out of wedlock, whereas 70% of black kids are. And welfare, the welfare system has brought that into place because it actually makes the father expendable. And I think that's created a big problem. In fact, there was a Stanford study many years ago, longitudinal study of 1,500 people who are in the top 1% IQ. In fact, Thomas Sowell talks about this. A longitudinal study means they track the same 1,500 people for 50 years to see where they turned out. You know what the number one reason for the difference in where these all equally brilliant people turned out? The number one reason was family structure. What family did they come from? That was the number one thing. And so, unfortunately, welfare has helped break up families, not just in the Black community, but also the white community. The fourth thing I think we can do is we should have housing incentive zones. We have them here in Charlotte, where if you're an investor and you want to invest in affordable housing for low-income people, you're going to get a 5-year tax credit or a 5-year tax break. And that works. You wonder why housing is so expensive in California? Because in the 1970s, people in the Bay Area between San Jose and San Francisco decided they were going to suspend all housing in order to protect the environment. Well, in 1 decade in Palo Alto, California, where Stanford is, housing prices quadrupled and there were no new houses built. Nobody can live in that part of the country because they're not building enough housing. In fact, the Black population in San Francisco between 1970 and 2005 was cut in half. Why? Because there's no housing. And so I think we can help people by building the right kind of housing and give people the incentive to actually build those housing. So those 4 things, I think, systematically are hurting minorities: abortion, the fact that we don't have school choice, the fact that we don't have welfare to work, and the fact that we don't have these housing incentive zones everywhere. If we did that, I think that would help. Now, I don't know of other laws that need to be changed that have a systematic bias toward minorities. If they're there, I want to change them. I'll be the first to join anybody to change them. But I haven't heard people tell me what those are. I'll say one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to you. Sure. I have heard that people have said that there's different sentencing guidelines for different drugs. For example, you're going to go away a lot longer if you deal crack than if you deal white cocaine, powder cocaine. And many people have said that disadvantages the Black community because crack is much more prevalent in the Black community than the white community. But what is often forgotten is the Black Congressional Caucus are the ones that wanted those sentencing differences because they wanted to get the crack cocaine out of the Black neighborhood. So they asked for the higher penalty. It wasn't because of racism. It was because they wanted to get those out. Now, there may be other instances that I don't know about that need to change. And if they do need to change, I'll be for it. But whether there is systematic racism in our laws, it seems to me there isn't, unless there's something I don't know. So let me turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So I need to ask permission for the floor because I have a lot of things that I really need to talk about, get off my chest, because this is an issue that I think we really need to talk about here. So I personally believe, and look, I may get in trouble for this. There may be backlash.
Just bring us the data, man. You're all right. Bring us the data.
Yeah. There may be backlash, but I have to be true to what I feel. Let me just first define what I believe systemic racism is before we even get into whether it is a thing or not. Systemic racism is not laws that have been written in our government that are designed to keep people of color or minorities back. The government is okay. They're not going to write any laws because, hey, those aren't permitted anymore. We've gotten past that. So it wouldn't be of anyone's best interest to write a law similar to the Jim Crow laws that says, whites can do this, but blacks cannot do that. So systemic racism is not about any particular written laws or codes about black or white people. But when people talk about systemic racism, what they're saying is there an undergirding? Is there a structure that is embedded within our society that is so immersed and so embedded under the current that even though you can't see it, which is the whole goal is not that you look at it and go, oh, that's racism, we got to get rid of that law. The goal is okay, how can we continue to maintain this maybe level of control without using any racial terms? Maybe we'll use the word underprivileged or socioeconomic challenge, but we won't say black, right? So because you can't say that. So it's an undergirding, right? Now, it's kind of like you look at you look at a lake, and on the surface it looks like the water's clean. You can go in there and you can you can do whatever you want to do. But then when you get in there under the surface, you see it's filled with all these chemicals and things like that. It's not meant for you to be seen. So the first thing we have to understand is systemic racism is not something that is supposed to be easily identified. Now, with that being said, what I really want to talk about is, first and foremost, let's talk about the power structure, all right? Because the idea is this. Whether we like it or not, statistics prove that in every major institution in our country, there is a disproportionate level of control that is really white control, right? So when we look at who controls the movies that we see, who controls the media, who owns the professional teams, who medical, political, judicial, educational, and every single institution, based on the statistics I've read, there's at least a 90, 95, sometimes a 99% power structure of leadership that is white, right? Let's just be honest about that. I mean, those are the numbers and numerical data. Now, let's say for the benefit of the doubt that the majority of people in leadership positions are not racist. Because I want to be honest. I want people to hear my heart here. Let's just give it the benefit of the doubt and say 90% of the people who are in positions of power and influence are not racist. They love Jesus. They're Christians. They don't have any bias, no prejudice, pure. Based on the numbers and the power structure that is present in our society, just sheer numbers, you are going to have more black people that are going to experience racism, even though there may not be a law written. You're going to have more minorities have to deal with this issue of racism simply because out of the large population of people that are, that are in power, even if most of them are not, there's enough of them that will be. And so therefore, that's the first thing that we have to understand. And how does that play out, right? Well, that may play out in a number of ways. For instance, discrimination. Let's talk about this. So there are statistics that will say that if you have a black sounding name, then you are 50% less likely to get an interview whenever your resume is just the same as somebody who has a white sounding name. So if my name is DeMarcus Jackson, or Jabari Jackson, or Takesha Willis, right? I could have a perfect resume. But because of the power structure, once again, please, guys, hear my heart. If that resume ends up on a desk of somebody who is not racist, let's just give it the benefit of the doubt, most people aren't, then that Takesha Willis is going to get a fair shot at that job. But because of the numbers, right? Because of the numbers of the people who are in positions of power, it is possible that it's more likely that if Takesha Willis's resume gets on a desk of somebody who happens to be racist, because of the sounding of her name, she's not going to get a phone call. And those are documented statistics, right? So we could look at things like that, right? Which is not a law, but it's just by sheer numbers. Things like public school funding. And I get it, the fact that property values in certain places are higher, but why is it that many of the schools in lower income areas are not getting as much funding, right, as schools in higher income areas? And so you're already now positioning a group of young people who should have every right to get the exact same education and to have access to the same technology and all those different things and new books and things like that, computers, laptops, iPads, whatever it is. But because they're not getting the same amount of funding, then therefore they're not getting the same opportunities. Now, is there a law? I don't know, but I'm saying we have to start asking the question, why are these things happening? Why is it that these schools are having, a disparity in the funding?
Yeah,
Now,
whether there is a law, it's called a lack of school choice. It's saying you've got to go to the school in your neighborhood. Now, that would change if we had school choice. I agree with you.
yeah. But once again, why can't we change it? I mean, the people who are in power.
I hate to get political on you, but there's one party that's for that and another party that isn't. Okay.
Yeah.
The folks, interestingly, 90% of African Americans vote for the Democrat Party, but the Democrat Party is not for school choice. Democrat Party is not for welfare reform or getting rid of abortion or for even housing incentive zones.
Right.
So the four things I mentioned. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So okay, and I don't want to get into some of these other ones, but statistics about school discipline, young kids getting in trouble and suspended or disciplined for some of the same things that people, are other kids that may do something the exact same thing as a white kid, black kid do the same exact thing in elementary school, and there seems to be statistically more discipline or more harsh discipline on African Americans in these schools. Once again, most teachers are probably good, but if there's a handful that see black kids as being troublemakers or something, then they're going to be the ones that are going to suffer in those situations. Now, I don't want to get into the voting things because that's not a thing that I want to focus on. But the one I really want to get into is this mass incarceration. And this is the one that I think, to me, is the biggest thing that is affecting the African American community. Now, you mentioned earlier something very important, and you said that, there was a time in the 60s and 70s where the black family unit and the white family unit both had a nuclear family, fathers and mothers in the same home. And so a lot of time people will say, hey, well, see, there it is. You can't blame slavery. You can't blame Jim Crow for where you're ending up today because, hey, when we got to the 60s and 70s, white and black families, about 70% of them both had mother and father. So then what happened after that? So the thing that people need to really understand, and this is critical, is that in the 80s, when there was a war on drugs, and this really impacted the African American community in a huge way, right? And so you mentioned is there was a lot of drugs. Let's just say. So first and foremost, let me just say this. Let me see if I can get to this. Okay, statistics on drug use. So these are statistics, and I have the footnotes below. According to statistics, whites and blacks consume and sell drugs at virtually the same rate. And that's from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Sciences. So to say that, well, hey, there's more arrests, there's more prison cell, there's more incarceration because blacks or have drugs more or they sell drugs, statistically from the data, that doesn't play out, right? So that's the first thing. And then the next thing we see here is black men are admitted to state prison, not just on basic crimes, we're just going to stick with drugs, on drug charges alone at a rate more than 13 times that of white men. So we have to ask the question, why is this happening? If there's no such thing as systemic racism in our judicial system, well, we have to ask the question, if they consume and sell drugs at the same rate virtually, why is it that black men are going to prison at a rate of 13 times greater than that of white men? And then the last one is this, which is very staggering. Although the majority of illegal drug users and dealers nationwide are white, 3/4 of the people imprisoned for drug offenses have been black or Latino. So we have to ask the question, how is this happening? Why is it happening? And if you peel back the layer, what we're going to see is that what happens in many situations, and I know I'm talking a lot, but I really need people to understand this. What happens in many situations is that there is an over-patrolling going on in the African American communities. Let's just say because maybe there's more crime. Okay, that's fine. Okay, there's more crime in these areas, so there's an over patrolling. But the way it's happening is this: a young black man on a bus, Bostic, I think his name was. He was asleep on a bus, and police officers came and they demanded that they check his bag and check his backpack or whatever. He had some cocaine in there. Turns out that they tried to sentence him, but then the Supreme Court actually reversed it. Why? Because the Fourth Amendment. So what's happening is oftentimes the Fourth Amendment that says we can't be
Unreasonable search and seizures.
Exactly. They're laxing on all of these rules to make it to where now things are being said, hey, if there's any suspicion, if a police officer has suspicion, then therefore they have the right to frisk and to search. And so all that needs to happen is if I say, hey, let me see your backpack, and the person says no, well, now you're not being compliant. I'm suspicious that you have something. And so therefore, let me check you out. And if they find crack or cocaine or marijuana on that person, then it goes to a place where that individual is now arrested. And then from there, it's horrible because oftentimes they don't have proper legal representation, right? And then they're forced to a plea bargain where they say, hey, you know what? You could actually spend 25 years in prison if you are convicted of this. But if you admit to it and you take a plea bargain, then you only get 3 years or 5 years. Now, who in the world is going to take a chance that they're going to spend 25 years in prison for just possession of marijuana, which, by the way, now is legalized in many states. So you have people now serving life sentences for things that are now legalized. Who in the right mind is going to say, man, I'm willing to go to trial and then they're going to find me guilty, 25 years versus 5. Okay, I'll just admit that I was wrong, even though I may not be. So now what happens? Let's go a little bit deeper with this. So what happens is now that young black man or white man, but for that matter, it's happening more in the black communities. Now what's happening is that black man is now sentenced. They have a felony and they are not able to have things like they have to check a box. It's hard for them to get a job when they get out. They don't have access to public housing or private housing. They don't have, they can't get welfare. They can't get food stamps. They can't do a lot of the things that would help them get ahead. And so a lot of times they turn around and they go back into the system. Now let's go even a little bit deeper, and this will be my last thing I say. We mentioned earlier about the family, the black family, and how in the 70s and stuff, it was nuclear, was good. But what did we notice that was happening at about the exact same time when the black family was solid? The war on drugs, the get tough on crime, and all these things. And so when you have 80% of kids in lower economic people having a jail record or criminal offense, that has a significant impact on the nuclear family of the black family. Because now you have all these men who have they're in prison or they were in prison, they got out, so they're limited in terms of how they can now provide for their family, which then creates another epidemic in the black community, which is black women who now don't have enough men to marry and all of this. And all of this is going on, and you have to ask the question, why are the police over patrolling these areas when we know that on the other side of town, in affluent areas or on college campuses where there may be white young men, they are consuming and selling drugs at the same rate? But why is there such a disparity? And that
I don't know if there's one answer to that, and it could be racism. But you may have answered your own question, Alan. If there are other, you say over patrolling, actually, as I say, most black Americans, 81% want more cops in their neighborhood. If there are more cops in an area where more crime is being committed, it's not hard to see why you're going to have more arrests and more convictions. So it might be that the white drug deals, and I've never used drugs, so I don't know the situation here, how even white drugs. So, but it might be that it's much more on the QT and it's much easier to see in the black community. I don't know. There might be racism going on here. It could be. These stats may pull it out. I do want to bring up, and you forgive me for bringing this up, but I thought it was a brilliant point. Everyone calls you Denzel Washington, but Denzel Washington actually said this. He was asked a question about this and about mass incarceration, and all he said was, "Where was the boy's father?"
Mm.
Oh, well, he was locked up. Well, where was his father? And then Denzel Washington said, I can tell you, they're not locking up 7-year-olds. Okay, this thing is so much a family issue, but it's not only a family issue. Here's a fallacy that I think we need to explode right now, Alan. You know it, and but I want to make sure our audience knows it. Very rarely is there one cause for a disparity between two groups. Very rarely. Usually, there's a number of factors that go into it. And one of the problems that some people who are sane, oh, here you go. Yeah, there's usually one cause for why people end up in different places. Um, a lot of times, people who are trying to say that the reason there are outcome differences between the ethnic groups, it's totally because of racism. Now, you can show that's not even true in your own household. For example, I know you have a sister. I have two sisters. Did your sister wind up in the same place that you are economically? My sisters haven't. One of them has made a whole ton more money than I have, and one of them less than I have. Now, we were all brought up under the same roof and the same parents. We're all the same race or the same ethnicity, and yet we wound up in different places. Why? Because people have different talents, different interests, different motivations, different personalities, different contacts, different breaks in life. And it's not all about racism. It's not even all about sexism. I mean, as I say, I got one sister who's made a ton of more money than I have and one sister that's made less. So I don't know what the situation is in your life, but when people are brought up in the same household, they don't wind up in the same place. So why should we expect all the groups to wind up in the same place?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so glad that you touched on this, because just as passionate as you all heard me, talk about the previous point about systemic racism, I am equally as passionate about what we're going to talk about here in just a moment, which is the idea of, is there some balance between, hey, personal responsibility versus, okay, I'm this way because the culture has made me this way, or the man is trying to hold me down. And let me be the first to say, all right, because Frank, as a middle-aged white man, might not be able to say what I'm getting ready to say to the black race, because I don't want him to be seen in a certain way. But I'll say it because I'm able to say it. I'll be the first to say, you know what? As black people, we need to do better. I'm just going to put it out there. And then some of you are not going to like what I said, but as black people, we need to do better. And it starts with the black man. We need to do better. Now, we could use all the excuses. I didn't have a father in the home. You know what? I'm not saying that it's not harder for some people who have had certain upbringings to be able to do better. I'm not suggesting that it doesn't have any effect, like Frank said, right? But you can't just go through your whole life and blame your upbringing as the reason why you are here. As black men, we got to do better. We got to stop getting women pregnant out of wedlock. We got to stop goofing off in school, as many of the kids that I taught whenever I was in school. You had a lot of the white kids who studied well and did well in school. You had a lot of the black kids who were just as smart, but they goofed off, right? We have to start doing better as a people. We have to do better with our finances, right? Instead of going to get some sort of Lexus and you're living in an apartment, why don't you use that same money to buy a house or invest or save? So don't get me started on the soapbox, because I believe that even though it may be more difficult for somebody who grew up in the hood, who didn't have a family structure, who maybe was impoverished, yes, it might be more difficult for that person than the kid on the other side of the tracks. But as a people, we have to do better and take personal responsibility to be able to help our own situation as African Americans, and not just wait for somebody to save us. And I'm not saying everybody's that way. I'm just saying there's a subset of us in our black community that we just need to do better. And I'm just going to leave it at that. We need to do better.
Yeah, well said, Alan. In fact, there's been some studies done of people that come from, say, the Caribbean and come into America, and obviously they share the same pigment, yet they tend to do better in the American culture in terms of outcome than people who are brought up in America. And on the other side, you have Asians who were put in concentration camps in America during World War II. They outperform whites and blacks. And so you throw all this on the table and you go, well, why is this so? Is it, I mean, again, let's state there is racism out there. There's no doubt about it. And we want to ferret it out whenever we find it. But it seems to me that right now, where we are in America in 2021, the playing field has never been more level. And where you're going to wind up in life is going to be wholly more dependent on the responsibility that you personally take for your own life than it is on any sort of structure or any sort of law or any sort of government program. It's going to be based on how much you're willing to work, how hard you're willing to work. And I can tell you right now, Alan, I don't know about you, but in Charlotte, we have trouble finding people to work here. Every store I go into says we're hiring now. We're hiring. We can't find people to work.
Right.
Why is that? Because the government's paying them not to work. That's why.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just about every store you go into, we're short staffed. We're short staffed. Exactly.
Yeah, there's restaurants that are closed. There's nobody to serve. There's nobody to be a server. So if you want to succeed in America, I don't care what color you are, you can do it. Despite what's happened in the past, despite even the fact that there might be racism or sexism or bigotry of some kind going on now, your effort is going to blow through all that regardless.
Yeah. And I totally agree. The only thing I would add to that, because I totally agree with you. I don't want people to ever, no matter what their background or situation is, I don't want people to ever feel like they can't make it. The only thing I would say to that is that it is harder for some to break through that threshold simply because of circumstances that were totally beyond their control when they were born. The family that they grew into, whether they had two parents, whether their uncles, put crack cocaine all around them and they grew up in drugs and, school wasn't. But we can't use it as an excuse. We have to do better, and it might be harder, but it is possible for anybody to achieve success. And I firmly believe that, particularly if you're a Christian, then, the Lord can give you that strength. Now, we'll make this, and you tell me if this is something you want to touch on. And then if not, because I know we're almost at 2 hours, if not, we can go on to talking about some solutions, and then we'll kind of wrap this thing up. Is this something you want to talk about here?
It won't take long. There's a difference between equity and equality. Equality means that everyone has the equal opportunity under the law. In other words, the law is not going to favor one person over another or disfavor one person over another. But equity means equal outcome by the law. In other words, we're going to take from the haves and give to the have-nots because we want to make sure everyone has the same. This is basically a Marxist position. Let me point out, Alan, that there has never been a country in the world that has achieved equity. It's impossible due to human nature. And secondly, even in heaven, we will not have equity. The Apostle Paul is going to have a lot more rewards than me and you, right? Because it's just that he gets more rewards than you and I get.
Hey, speak for yourself, man.
That's right. You may get more.
I'm just joking.
But you think of the parable of the talents. This is talking about how God is going to judge people, right? Jesus, the parable where he gives 5 and is it 2 or 3? I can't remember, and 1. And then he says, I'm going to go away, and when I come back, let's see what you've done with it. And the first 2 guys, the guys with 5 and 2, they doubled what they had, but the guy with 1 hid it. And what did Jesus do? He scolded the guy with 1, and he took his talent and gave it to the guy that had more. That's not equity. That's justice. And what we're going to get in heaven, first of all, we're going to get into heaven on account of grace, but we're going to get our rewards on account of justice.
Hmm.
So equity isn't even going to happen in heaven. It's not going to happen on earth, not going to happen in heaven.
Yeah, yeah. I don't really have much to add to that. I agree with your perspective. The thing that I struggle with a little bit with this one, and I should have put the graphic up here, but I know you've seen the graphic with the three kids trying to look over and look in the baseball game, and if you guys can visualize it, right? You got one tall person who's standing on a box. You have a middle person who's standing on a box, and then you have a shorter person who's standing on a box. So each of them get a box, but the tall guy and the middle height person are tall enough because they have this box to
Mm-hmm.
look over and see the game. But the short person is standing on a box, and they're still, even with the box, they're not able to see over and see the game. And so, some people will argue and say, well, hey, even the tall guy without the box can still see the game, right? So let's take the box from the tall guy and give it to the short kid. And now the short kid can stand on two boxes and now he can see the game. And I've seen pros and cons. I've seen arguments for and against that graphic. I've seen some people say, well, hey, I mean, everybody should have the opportunity to watch the game. And the guy who's tall, he can still see the game. So why does he need a box? Well, I mean, why wouldn't it make sense? Why wouldn't we give the box to the short kid who now can have two? Because hey, now all three can watch the game. And I've heard people argue that and say, well, the person who's short, nobody's talking about why they're short. Hey, the guy who's tall, let's talk about maybe how he got to where he's tall. So now because he's tall, he's being penalized as something that's supposed to give to him is being taken away. So I'm like, that one is one that I see. I see the Marxist perspective, which is, hey,
Uh-huh.
I've earned this, I've worked hard, and therefore, why take something away from me? And I've worked hard. I deserve this to give it to somebody who has. I get that, especially from a middle class person who has worked hard and has degrees and owns a home. Like I get that, right? I wouldn't want somebody to take it away from me. And so that's why for this one, yeah, I'll just be honest with you. I'm not. I don't. I get what you're saying. I understand it, and you're right. It is pretty impossible for us to mandate or ensure the equal outcomes. But what my struggle with it is by simply giving everybody the same thing, we say, oh, that's equality, and everybody has equal possibility, but it doesn't take into consideration that what we give each person may or may not be what they need in order to take the next step. And like I
Let me
said,
let me
yeah,
yeah let me make just one point about this. Jeff
yeah, please,
Bezos
yeah,
makes how many billions a year as the CEO of Amazon? I don't know, but if the government were to come in and take most of Jeff Bezos's money and spread it around to all of the as many poor people as possible in America, it would have a worse effect on those poor people than helping them. Here's why: because Jeff Bezos, due to the fact that he is an incentive to create a business like Amazon, has employed so many people and has made life better for so many people that if you take that incentive away, everybody's going to suffer, from Bezos to all the people employed by him, by the to the very poor people that we're trying to help by giving them money. It's not going to help them in the long run.
yeah,
So capitalism is the best. It's not the perfect way, but it's the best way to get people out of poverty. It's the only known way to do it. What Marxism does or socialism does is it shares misery equally.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
but capitalism gives you an opportunity to lift to the tide, or the rising tide that lifts all boats.
yeah,
Because I submit to you today that people in America today who are considered below the poverty line, Alan, they live better than people who are middle class in other countries, maybe even upper class in other countries. People below the poverty line have 2 or 3 TVs, they have a car, they have, in America, they're living better than most of the world.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
what capitalism does.
Yep. And you know what? I look. I don't have anything to say about that. I will
Mhm.
say that. Well, let me agree with you and say that I believe that. I firmly believe that.
Mhm.
I'm grateful to be in the United States to have the opportunity to be the next Jeff Bezos. Now, for me, that's not money. I'm not trying to make that. Let me be careful because if people may take that and say Alan's trying to get paid and all that. No,
Yeah.
well, let me just say that I'm grateful to be in a country where if I'm able to come up with a career or a business idea that I can be rewarded for that if I put hard work into it. And I don't have to fear that, it's going to be taken away from me. Now, what I
Mhm.
will say is that what should be happening is if I am that tall person and I really don't need that box, as a
Mhm.
Christian, I should probably give
Sure.
that box to that short person so they can watch the game, especially if I know that they are working hard and it's not their fault. But that, I agree, shouldn't be mandated from the government.
That's
I
right.
shouldn't
Yeah.
be
Yep.
told to give
Mhm.
stuff away that I've worked hard for. But as
Mhm.
a Christian, I should be encouraged or motivated to say, hey, you know what? I don't need this. And this is going to help somebody else. And so from that respect, yeah. So I think
By
we're
the way, there's a great book on this. It won't take anybody long to read. It's called Money, Greed, and God by Jay Richards. Money, Greed, and God by Jay Richards. Check it out. It's an amazing book. Anyway, let's go to our final one then.
okay, yeah, yeah. Somebody said I'm not giving away my box. All right. So a couple questions here, and I'd like for you to ask me one, and I can ask you one, and then we'll talk about solutions, and then we'll be done because I know we're pushing almost 2 hours. Frank and I didn't expect to go this long, but hopefully you guys are getting some things. So
Hey, let's tell people right now that next Wednesday night we're going to
yes,
be together, and we're going to broadcast it on our YouTube channel and your YouTube channel, and most of it's going to be Q&A. So if you're worried about questions now, come Wednesday night 8 Eastern to either of these channels, and Al and I are going to be on again, and we're going to bring you live on video
video.
into this discussion, and you can ask any question you want about any of the stuff we've talked about tonight or even other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Look, that we're not going to, due to the amount of time, we may not have as much time to do questions. We maybe take a few, but next
Yep.
week is going to be the time where Frank and I are going to shut up. We're not going to come with anything pre planned. We're just going to hang out and answer your questions. And like you said, we're going to bring you on camera, so it's not just us reading your questions on the screen. You're going to actually have a chance to come on via Skype. Now, a couple of questions because now I want to move into just a short conversation here about solutions and how we can get better, and I'd love for me to ask you one question, you ask me another question. So, if you want, why don't you ask me this? When we talk about race relations and have
Yeah.
these conversations, how can? Well, I'll let you ask me.
Yeah, how can whites engage blacks better? What should we be doing? And by the way, it almost seems like this is a racist question, like as if I mean, as if it there's a difference between us that is significant that should cause us not to be able to have a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Well,
like, why do we even have to? Why don't we just say how can people engage one another better on race?
yeah, yeah,
You know?
and that's
Yeah,
fine as well. Yeah, I was going to
yeah.
ask that, and then I got it. I was basically going to have me, you ask. I was going to ask you. How can blacks engage whites better? But we can forego both of those, right? So,
There are there may be cultural differences. So if we do want to suggest there are cultural differences, then the question's valid. So
yeah,
if if I as a white wanted to engage a friend of mine who's black on talk about race, what tips would you give me
and
or
that's
our
basically what
audience?
I'm trying to get to is,
Yeah, yeah,
hey, I
yeah.
want to engage, I want, yeah, so exactly. I want to engage someone who's white in the conversation, but I'm afraid of being offensive. I'm afraid of saying the wrong things, right? So I would like to know, hey, what are some things that maybe I need to avoid? What's the best way to approach it in a way that they would receive it? So that's the
Mm-hmm.
idea here. So from our perspective, I think the biggest thing is taking the position of a learner and a listener and really kind of not just getting so defensive when the conversation comes up, A, and B, not assuming that if we have conversations about race, then therefore that makes you a racist. I think that is the part that makes it so difficult sometimes
Mm-hmm,
for us
mm-hmm,
to have conversations, is that shortly after, a lot of times when I may have conversation with some of my white friends, it's as if they feel that they have to start defending themselves to prove or exonerate themselves from not being a racist. And a lot of things will come out like, well, hey, look, I was the only, white on my basketball team growing up, and I've got a lot of black friends, and I've got black people that work for me, and you start hearing all these things come. I don't see color, and I was taught not to see that, and you hear all these things come out, and it's almost like, whoa, okay, I'm not, I'm just trying to talk to you, trying to bring these things up, like, but there's this feeling of like, okay, I gotta defend my turf. I gotta prove to this guy that I'm not a racist. And so I think that just kind of removing that from the conversation, just trying to be a listener, trying to not get so emotional about it, and just simply having a good conversation where we can talk candidly and be open to a different perspective and experience in that particular conversation. Those are some things that I would say would make it easier to rules of engagement, if you will.
and let me second that and also say this, that I think that when people put forth critical race theory and intersectionality as part of their solution, I think many people are already going, I can't even talk about this. Because if you're going to put me in a category and say I'm guilty because I'm in this category already, I'm one of the oppressors, no matter what I do, because I'm white, because I'm heterosexual, because I'm a Christian, why even talk about it? If you're going to already put me in that category, that's being racist and sexist and a whole bunch of other ifs right away, right out of the gate. You say you're fighting racism and you're being a racist doing it. That doesn't work. So I think that's one thing that needs to be, because I think some people are so tired, and unfortunately, it's just because of the media and everything that's been covered in recent years. We make so much progress on race. We have a president who is half African American, right? We vote him in twice, and yet there are people out there saying that we're worse than we've ever been, and I think whites in general are going, what? How can this be? How can we be worse than we've ever been? We've made so much progress. Now there's still some room to go. We get that, but I think that when you're going to talk about issues and put people in categories and say it's awful, it's never been, people are going to check out. So you can't start there. You can't start there by saying that. You got to say, look, we should not put people in categories. We ought to treat people regardless of what their skin color is, regardless of what their beliefs are, as individuals, and judge them, as King said, on the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And any categorization going on in my mind is completely sinful, and it's a stereotype, and it's the very thing that we don't want
Mm-hmm.
people to do to us, right? I don't want somebody to say
Mm-hmm.
this guy's black and therefore
Right.
he's this, and no one who is a Christian should ever be doing any sort of stereotyping. Now, all of us have prejudging that we do. It's just part of our sin nature, so we're prejudiced. Every single one of us look at people and say, "Oh, that person is this," or "This person is smart because they're this," or "They're good at math because they're
Right.
this," or "This person's probably runs track because or they play basketball because they're tall and black." Like, we all have these things that
Yeah.
we have, but to put people in categories, I definitely agree that should not be happening. So, Frank, let's transition to the final thing. What's the
Mm-hmm.
solution here? That can hopefully make the relationships between races or ethnic backgrounds, if we want to rather use that phrase, right? What's our ultimate? How do we get there?
Well,
Ben's
as we
there at
said
the
at the
beginning.
top of the show, as we said at the top of the show, it's got to be the gospel. That's the solution to it all, because we're all one in Christ, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of even our gender. We're one in Christ, right? Doesn't mean our genders go away. Doesn't mean our ethnicities go away when we become a Christian. But we say we're one in Christ because Christ has adopted us all into His family. I was reading the Heidelberg Catechism. My wife is going through it last night, Alan, and one guy was pointing out that there are three G's, and I'm going to add a fourth G to this in the Christian life. There's guilt, there's grace, there's gratitude, and then there's glory. In other words, all of us are guilty of sin. All of us are guilty of sin. What's the solution to being guilty of sin? Grace. And out of grace, we have gratitude for what God has done for us because Christ came and took our sins on himself, and then he imputes us his righteousness. We have gratitude to live as he told us to live. And how did he tell us to live? He said, I give you one new command, love one another as I have loved you. How do you love one another? As he loved us, you sacrifice for the other person, regardless of their ethnicity, their gender, whatever it is, you sacrifice for the other person. And then the fourth G is ultimately it's going to wind up in glory. Okay, so we all have guilt, but thank God there's grace. We ought to be grateful for that. And ultimately, we're all going to head to glory together, and heaven's going to be a multi-ethnic place. So we ought to try and make it that way here, too. We ought to be going to church with people who are different ethnic groups. But tragically, it's still the most segregated hour on Sunday morning, right? So maybe you can put your worship preferences aside. Oh, I don't like the kind of music they play over there. So you can go be with your brothers and sisters and disciple one another in Christ. That's the solution. Yeah. And by the way, Christianity is the only solution. Why? Let me just quickly go through this. Darwinism isn't the solution. You know what Darwin's title to his book was? The Origin of Species? The favored races. He thought the Caucasians were the favorite races and the Negroes were lower, according to Darwin. Darwinism isn't going to bring it to you. Atheism's not going to bring it to you. The Hindu worldview is not going to bring it to you. They have a caste system. The Muslim worldview isn't going to bring you unity. Why? Because if you're not a Muslim, you're a second-class citizen. The only worldview that's going to bring all of us together as Christians under God, in God's family, is the Christian worldview. That's it. That's the solution to all this. And so we need to preach the gospel, and we need to get our own house in order in the church in order to help the country do the same thing.
Amen. Man, I couldn't have said it better. And I'll add one more thing to that. As we talk about the gospel, guys, you know, Jesus talked about, you know, loving your neighbor as yourself. And the last thing that I'll say, and I'm done for the night, is this. This is really strongly in my heart. I really encourage us all to start seeing every single person that you come across as somebody who is made in the image of God. So when you see, whether you're white or black, and you see that kid with sagging pants, with, you know, a wife beater on and smoking a cigar on the side of the road or on the bus or getting on the plane, before you prejudge, before you start to think of all the different things that pop in your mind about this particular person, just remember that person was made in the image of God. Might be different than you, but they were made in the image of God. Before you see some white person that, you know, some people may consider poor white trash, if you will, whatever that is, right? Which, once again, these phrases, ghetto, poor white trash, that's what I'm saying. You got to get those stereotypes out of your brain. This person is not ghetto. This person is not poor white trash. This person is not ratchet, right? No, every person you meet is a person that is made in the image of God. And if you keep that in the forefront of your mind, it'll be a lot easier for you to extend love to that person on the plane that smells like weed, that's got their pants hanging halfway down, and you're in your sin nature, you want to judge. Just remember, wait a second. Jesus died for that brother, and he is made in the image of God, and I need to treat him as such and love him. I think if we start having that type of mentality for everyone that we meet, the world will be a better place, and people will end up loving one another and hopefully being more unified.
Amen, brother. Boom.
Woo, man. Frank, we got through it, man. We got through it. Right. Now the question is, will our YouTube channel still be up after this video, or should we take this video down so that no one can only the people that were here have seen it? And no, I'm joking.
I hope we were able to model a conversation or a method of a conversation that we ought to have on this issue. And as I say too, we're going to put some links maybe down there from some stats that we may have cited here. We'll put them in the description. So if you guys want to look into that stuff further, you can.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Up to you. Do you have time? Should we take 2 or 3 questions, or you just want to push them all
We
to
can take
next
2 or
Wednesday?
3, but on Wednesday, again, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, both on The Beat with Alan Parr and the Cross Examined YouTube channel. Alan and I are going to be just like this again. And all we're going to do is take any questions you have or comments you have.
Yeah, yeah, guys. I know we said we're going to try to take some questions, but the fact that we've been on for 2 hours here, we will dedicate some time to this next week. And I'll put this one on here. Stella Williams says, Alan and Frank, love the both of you. Keep the line of love going. That's a comment that's worth putting on the screen. Thank you, Stella. We appreciate that. And hopefully you guys, we expressed some very strong things as we talked about all these things, but hopefully you all will, continue to support us, what we're doing, and know that at the end of the day, Frank and I want the same thing. We want to see people saved. We want to see, the world, we want to see Christians on fire for the Lord, making disciples, and we want to see people love each other. And we want to see people, white people, black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, put all the differences down and really love and respect people. So hopefully you guys got that. We had some different perspectives today, but it's okay. And this is how we learn. This is how we grow. This is how our minds are opened up. And hopefully you guys appreciated that. Any final words from you, Frank, before we kind of shut it down for the day?
By the way, I want to let everyone know that this was Alan's idea, so he gets all the credit, man. He's like, "Hey, let's do this." I was like, "Oh, okay."
All the credit or all the blame.
Yeah. For those of you that don't know what we do, go to crossexamined.org and our YouTube channel, Cross Examined. We do a lot of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist presentations on college campuses. So we have over 1,000 short Q&A videos that students ask about the Christian faith. And for those of you watching on Cross Examined, if you don't know who Alan is, you need to go to The Beat by Alan Parr on the YouTube channel, because Alan covers a number of great theological and even some apologetic issues over there. Short videos again. So subscribe to both the channels out there, if you would, ladies and gentlemen, and tell other people about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not have said it better. If there's one person that I always point people to whenever people have questions about apologetics and defending their faith, first thing I tell them is to go watch crossexamined.org. Dr. Frank's gonna set you straight and point you in the right direction. So if you're really trying to grow in that area, like Frank said, highly recommend his channel. And thank everybody for being here tonight. Remember, next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. We're going to be back on both of these channels, just simply answering your question. Maybe we'll be on for an hour or so. And so if you want people to join in, send them the link to these videos, either Frank's channel or Frank's link or mine, doesn't matter. And hopefully let them watch, get them caught up and say, hey, if you want to talk about these things, we'll bring you on Skype and we'll go from there. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us for the last couple of hours. We appreciate you all. And have a great evening. Continue to love people and love your neighbor as yourself. All right. God bless.